The courtroom was alive with a hum that teetered between anticipation and unease. Cameras clicked in rapid succession, capturing every polished shoe, every nervous hand, every subtle glance. Reporters whispered in clusters, exchanging hurried observations, their eyes flicking repeatedly toward the center of the room where history seemed poised to unfold. The air itself felt heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken tension, as if the walls were holding their breath along with the audience. Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, calm, resolute, her presence demanding attention without demanding it loudly. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the gathered journalists, the flurry of digital devices recording every movement, and most importantly, the figure before her who had just interrupted her meticulously rehearsed argument. Judge Stephen Breyer, known for his formidable intellect but also for a sharp, sometimes dismissive wit, leaned back slightly, lips curling into a faint, incredulous smile. The courtroom seemed to tilt on its axis, caught between decorum and drama. And then it happened. A soft chuckle, almost imperceptible at first, but it grew, resonating in the quiet like a clap of thunder in a still sky. Breyer laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not an amused acknowledgement. It was a laugh that carried the weight of disbelief, a dismissive echo that challenged Crockett's words before they could even settle. The room stilled, as if the sound had sucked the air out of every corner. A collective gasp ran through the audience, audible even over the clicking cameras. Reporters froze mid-note, interns glanced at each other with wide-eyed uncertainty, and the digital feed of the courtroom caught every flicker of shock on every face. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but there was no hesitation in her posture, no falter in her gaze. For a moment, the courtroom itself seemed suspended, waiting to see what she would do next. Her voice, when it came, would have to cut through not just the laughter but the invisible pressure that had descended on the room. Every person present could feel it, the suspense thick as fog, the disbelief mingled with curiosity, the subtle promise of a confrontation that might be remembered for years to come. And just as murmurs began to ripple among the spectators, and the cameras captured the tiny shift in Breyer's expression, the room waited. What Jasmine would say next wasn't just a response, it was a signal. A signal that would turn shock into awe, tension into reckoning, and leave everyone watching frozen in disbelief, hearts pounding, minds gripping the edge of what was about to unfold. But what Jasmine said next silenced the entire room, and left everyone frozen in awe. The courtroom had barely recovered from the shock of Breyer's laughter when the gravity of the situation began to settle over everyone like a heavy curtain. This was more than a simple exchange of words. This was a collision of ideologies, of principles, and of identities. Outside the marble walls, the nation was watching. Social media feeds were already lighting up with fragments of the confrontation, headlines racing ahead of the facts, framing the story as a clash between tradition and change, authority and accountability. The stakes could not have been higher. Jasmine Crockett was not just defending a case, she was defending the very principles that had carried her to this moment: equity, justice, and the unshakable belief that the law must serve the people, not shield arrogance. Her every word carried the weight of countless stories: immigrant families seeking fairness, communities fighting for recognition, citizens whose voices were too often ignored. She was the embodiment of a rising voice demanding to be heard, calm yet unstoppable, eloquent yet unyielding. In the eyes of the public, she represented more than herself. She represented the hope that integrity could triumph even in the most intimidating arenas. On the other side, Judge Stephen Breyer, a figure of immense experience and authority, represented the establishment. His laugh had been a subtle reminder that power often shields itself with confidence and condescension. To him, Crockett's statements might have seemed naive or idealistic, yet beneath the chuckle, there was calculation, a sense of certainty that he controlled the room. He was the mountain against which the river of justice and morality would crash, a figure both respected and feared, but increasingly tested by the audacity of the moment. The tension between them was more than personal, it was emblematic. It was the struggle between an entrenched system that assumed its own infallibility and a new generation demanding accountability. Every observer in that courtroom felt it, from the young intern scribbling notes to the seasoned journalists weighing every inflection and gesture. Every pause, every flicker of emotion, became amplified, like a drumbeat signaling an approaching storm. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening to the unspoken duel between authority and conviction. And then the whispers began, subtle at first, threading through the room like electricity. This was not just about the case on the docket. It was about identity, about who gets to be seen, heard, and respected in spaces long dominated by the powerful. The hero and villain framing was undeniable: Crockett, poised, principled, embodying dignity and the promise of change; Breyer, seasoned, authoritative, and confident in the weight of his own legacy. The courtroom had become a stage for a drama whose consequences would ripple far beyond its doors. A sense of inevitability began to settle in. The audience sensed that something monumental was about to happen, a turning point that would redefine expectations. Every eye in that room, every lens trained from outside, awaited the moment when the confrontation would reach its peak. And in that suspended space, a collective shiver ran through those watching. The tension was unbearable, and the villain's arrogance was about to backfire. Stephen Breyer had built a career on intellect, precision, and a reputation that demanded respect. He was the kind of figure who commanded attention simply by entering a room, his presence a quiet assertion of authority honed over decades. Colleagues described him as brilliant, methodical, unshakable, a man whose decisions could shape national policy and whose words could echo through courtrooms for years. His experience was a fortress, one reinforced by countless victories and a legacy that few dared to challenge. But brilliance, like any armor, has its vulnerabilities. Beneath the meticulous arguments and the scholarly poise, Breyer carried a tendency that had emerged time and again in his career, a subtle condescension toward those he deemed less seasoned, less established, or, in his mind, insufficiently weighty to match his own gravitas. In high-stakes debates, this would often manifest as a barely perceptible smirk, a carefully timed chuckle, or a dismissive interjection. To the untrained eye, these gestures could seem innocuous, almost playful, but those who had faced him knew they were calculated moves, designed to unbalance and intimidate. It was a pattern. Young, ambitious voices, particularly those challenging systemic norms or advocating progressive ideals, often found themselves the target of his subtle tests. A sharp question would be met with a patronizing tone, a bold argument would be met with a casual laugh that belied its underlying message: do you truly believe you can stand against decades of precedent and authority? Time and again, Breyer's opponents had faltered, not because their logic was flawed, but because the sheer weight of his presence and the undercurrent of disdain was disorienting. Yet arrogance, even when tempered by intellect, can blind. There were moments in his career where Breyer's confidence led him to underestimate the persistence of those who refused to be intimidated. In the courtroom, in committee rooms, and during high-profile hearings, he occasionally misread not the facts but the fortitude of his challengers. They were individuals who understood that brilliance could be matched by preparation, that authority could be confronted with dignity, and that a calm, unwavering voice could fracture even the most imposing facade. In public discourse, Breyer's demeanor had inspired both admiration and quiet frustration. Admirers lauded his ability to command order, to distill complex legal arguments into compelling judgments. Critics, however, noted a tendency toward arrogance that bordered on dismissiveness, particularly toward younger figures who dared to confront him with energy and innovation. He was a man respected by his peers but feared, and sometimes resented, by those who had felt the subtle sting of his judgment. This duality made him a compelling figure to watch. His experience commanded attention, his confidence intimidated. Yet his occasional miscalculations, his subtle underestimations, planted the seeds for moments of poetic justice that would make the eventual triumphs all the more satisfying. Audiences watching the courtroom today could feel it, an undercurrent of tension that hinted at the possibility of reversal, a moment when the carefully constructed facade might crack under the weight of truth delivered with precision. Every movement Breyer made carried historical weight. Every measured glance, every slight shift in posture, every carefully placed interjection was a reminder of why he had earned his position. Yet the very qualities that had propelled him also made him vulnerable: a belief in the superiority of experience, a reliance on the intimidation of presence, and a subtle pattern of underestimating voices rising from the margins. It was a combination that had worked for decades, but one that had never faced someone like Jasmine Crockett. And so, As the courtroom held its breath, observers sensed the drama that was about to unfold. Breyer's reputation preceded him, his intellect unquestionable, his confidence near legendary. But in the quiet corners of anticipation, the attentive could already see the cracks forming, small, almost imperceptible, yet significant. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the limits of authority against the resolve of preparation, composure, and moral clarity. But little did he know, Crockett's preparation and resolve were unmatched. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin in the polished courtrooms of Washington, D.C., nor in the glare of media cameras. It began in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce, where the weight of systemic neglect pressed against families like an unyielding tide. From a young age, she learned that perseverance was not a choice but a necessity, that every step forward required focus, courage, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of justice. Her early years were marked by sacrifice, long hours of study while balancing part-time jobs, nights spent poring over books and cases that would later shape her understanding of law and society, and weekends devoted to community service that nurtured both empathy and determination. These formative experiences forged the foundation of her character. Crockett did not just learn the law, she lived it, felt its shortcomings, and understood intimately how it could both protect and fail those who relied on it. Her academic path was rigorous, demanding excellence at every turn, but she excelled not simply to attain accolades, she excelled to prepare herself for moments exactly like the one she now faced in Breyer's courtroom. Each exam passed, each case studied, each mentor encountered was a brick in the bridge that connected her to this defining moment. Her advocacy work further honed the qualities that would make her unforgettable. Crockett represented clients who were often overlooked or dismissed, immigrant families navigating complex legal systems, marginalized communities fighting for basic rights, and individuals who had been silenced by circumstance. In every instance, she displayed a rare combination of empathy and precision, a sharp intellect that could dismantle convoluted legal arguments and a human understanding that ensured her approach was never cold or abstract. Her clients saw in her a fierce protector, one who listened, learned, and then acted with measured brilliance. The respect she earned was not given lightly, it was built through relentless commitment, unflinching courage, and the integrity to speak truth even when it was inconvenient or unpopular. Court experience had shaped her into more than a lawyer, it had shaped her into a presence. She had learned to command attention not through volume or theatrics but through calm, calculated authority. Judges accustomed to bluster and intimidation often found themselves taken aback by her quiet confidence. She had mastered the subtle art of pacing, of choosing exactly the right moment to deliver a point that would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. Every gesture, every inflection, every pause was deliberate, a part of a larger narrative carefully constructed to ensure clarity, impact, and resonance. Yet what made Crockett remarkable was not simply her professional skill. It was her ability to remain composed under pressure, to absorb the tension and respond with clarity rather than emotion. Years of navigating hostile environments, both inside the courtroom and in society at large, had taught her that true strength was visible in restraint, in the capacity to turn potential intimidation into opportunity. Her intellect was formidable, but it was her steadiness, her moral clarity, and her ability to see through arrogance to the core of truth that made her a hero in the eyes of those who followed her journey. Those who had watched her rise recognized patterns in her approach, meticulous preparation, a strategic understanding of opponents, and an innate ability to anticipate challenges before they fully manifested. Breyer's chuckle, intended as a subtle dismissal, was no match for the careful construction of her response. Every line she had prepared, every fact she had studied, every rhetorical strategy she had rehearsed was aligned to deliver maximum impact. The courtroom, for all its grandeur and gravitas, would become a stage on which her resilience and intellect converged in perfect timing. Crockett's journey was not without cost. Sacrifices had been made, nights spent away from family and friends, personal ambitions delayed, and the constant pressure of proving oneself in spaces historically resistant to voices like hers. Yet these sacrifices had cultivated a depth of understanding, a nuanced perception of justice, and an unwavering commitment to integrity. Every challenge faced, every barrier broken, had prepared her not only to answer Breyer's condescension but to transform it into a defining moment of inspiration for anyone who believed in fairness, courage, and the power of truth. Her reputation had begun to precede her. Colleagues, clients, and observers alike spoke of her with admiration tinged with awe. They knew that when Crockett spoke, her words carried weight, not because of volume or theatrics, but because of substance, authenticity, and the unshakable foundation of experience behind them. This combination of intellect, resilience, and moral clarity created anticipation. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. The courtroom, the media, and the audience outside were all on the cusp of witnessing a response that would ripple far beyond the walls of that room, a moment that would leave an indelible mark. And when the moment arrived, every word she spoke would hit like lightning. The courtroom atmosphere thickened with a tension so palpable it felt almost physical. Every eye followed Jasmine Crockett as she delivered her carefully measured argument, her voice calm but resolute, each word carrying the weight of years of preparation. And then, without warning, Judge Breyer leaned forward, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, and interjected. His voice was smooth, almost teasing, but the undertone was unmistakable, a test of dominance, a subtle reminder of who had held authority in that room for decades. The first chuckle rippled through the courtroom, quiet but unmistakable, carrying the arrogance of someone confident that the other could not possibly respond with equal force. A camera captured the slight shift in Crockett's posture, the careful balance between acknowledgement and unflinching resolve. She did not stumble. She did not flinch. She merely allowed a breath to settle the tension, eyes steady, voice measured. The silence that followed was heavier than any spoken word, every spectator acutely aware of the unspoken duel unfolding before them. Breyer's interruptions escalated in subtle layers. A raised eyebrow here, a pointed pause there, a tone that suggested impatience, disbelief, or even condescension. Murmurs ran through the audience, some curious, others uncomfortable, as if sensing the microaggressions threading through the exchange. It was a performance in control versus restraint. Breyer tested boundaries, probing for weakness, attempting to provoke a crack in Crockett's composure. And yet, she remained unwavering, calm, deliberate, and poised. Every pause she took, every phrase she delivered, emphasized control over chaos, intellect over intimidation. The contrast was striking. Where Breyer's gestures carried the weight of authority seasoned by decades, Crockett's presence radiated clarity and moral certainty. The young, composed figure before the court seemed to absorb the tension and reflect it back, not with anger, but with a quiet, unassailable strength. Each rebuttal was precise, dismantling assumptions without aggression, exposing gaps in logic with surgical exactness. The audience, both inside and beyond the courtroom, felt it, a growing admiration, a collective recognition that this was not merely an argument being made, but a statement of principle. Every camera angle, every close-up, amplified the drama. The subtle tightening of Breyer's jaw, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, contrasted sharply with Crockett's calm gaze, unwavering and authoritative. The whispers in the courtroom intensified, journalists adjusted their lenses, capturing every nuance of expression. The room was suspended in an intricate ballet of tension, each participant acutely aware that this was no ordinary proceeding. Even the silent spectators, the court clerks, the interns, the legal aides, felt the electric charge of anticipation that crackled through the air. As the debate continued, Breyer's interruptions became sharper, his laughter more pointed, his dismissive gestures more deliberate. He aimed to unsettle, to disrupt the rhythm, to make the courtroom a theater of intimidation. Yet with each attempt, Crockett's composure only grew stronger, her responses more incisive. She turned potential derision into a platform for clarity, every rebuttal highlighting not only the flaws in Breyer's assumptions but the steadfastness of her own reasoning. The audience could feel the pendulum swinging. Where tension had once skewed in favor of authority, it now shifted subtly toward principle and preparation. The courtroom became a stage for an escalating struggle, not of volume, but of precision, moral clarity, and resilience. Every breath, every glance, every pause carried significance. Each microaggression, intended to destabilize, only illuminated Crockett's steadiness, her unshakable command of the facts, and her capacity to withstand pressure with grace. Then, in that charged atmosphere, as the murmurs grew and the cameras lingered on the smallest facial cues, the room sensed it, the tipping point was near. A line was about to be spoken, a moment that would crystallize all the tension, all the anticipation, all the contrast between arrogance and integrity. The stakes had never felt higher, the suspense never more palpable. Then came the line that would freeze the courtroom, and make history. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Jasmine Crockett straightened, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the podium. Every eye was on her, every camera lens zoomed in, every mind braced for the moment that had been building, taut as a drawn bow. Breyer's laughter had faded into a tense stillness, a subtle undercurrent of unease rippling through his poised exterior. And then she spoke, her voice calm, deliberate, and imbued with the quiet authority of someone who had prepared for this moment her entire life. "Your Honor," she began, her tone measured yet commanding, "with all due respect, the assumptions you've made overlook the lived realities of the very people this court exists to protect." The words were simple, almost understated, yet they carried a weight that no chuckle or smirk could diminish. She paused, letting the sentence settle, watching as the tension in the room coiled tighter around Breyer. A faint murmur passed through the gallery, a ripple of disbelief, admiration, and anticipation. The moment was fragile, and yet it was electrifying. She continued, her arguments flowing with precision, dissecting the foundation of Breyer's assumptions with surgical clarity. Each point was anchored in fact, each observation grounded in lived experience, each rebuttal delivered with the measured cadence of someone who had mastered the art of speaking truth to power. When we dismiss the voices of those marginalized, when we assume their challenges can be reduced to statistics or precedent, we ignore justice itself. And that is not a compromise the law can afford. Her gaze did not waver, her posture remained unflinching, and her tone never faltered. Every syllable struck like a hammer, precise and inevitable. The courtroom's reaction was instantaneous. A gasp here, a whisper there, the faint rustle of notebooks as journalists scrambled to capture her words. Breyer's eyes narrowed slightly, his confident mask beginning to crack under the weight of her logic. The smirk that had once suggested control now seemed tentative, fragile, as though the room itself had shifted beneath him. Every gesture he made, every subtle adjustment in his posture, betrayed a realization that the tide had turned. Crockett's calm authority was unassailable, her preparation undeniable. The tension built further with every word. She paused strategically, allowing the weight of her argument to sink in. Her silence became as powerful as her speech, commanding the room with an unspoken challenge. Notice this, recognize it, and understand that arrogance cannot override reason. The subtle reactions in the courtroom, the slight lean forward of a reporter, the tightened jaw of a clerk, the quick glance exchanged between observers, amplified the drama, creating a cascade of anticipation that made every second stretch taut with significance. And then she delivered the line that would reverberate beyond the marble walls: "Justice is not about preserving comfort or tradition, it is about confronting truth, even when it unsettles those who believe themselves unshakable." The word struck the room like a lightning bolt. There was a collective inhalation, the sound almost tangible, as the authority of her presence eclipsed the previous tension. Breyer's composure faltered for the first time, the carefully maintained equilibrium of years of experience shaken by the clarity and moral weight of her words. Social media, already buzzing with snippets of the confrontation, exploded as clips of her statement spread like wildfire. Hashtags trended, tweets multiplied, commentary surged. Observers across the nation replayed the moment, dissecting her precision, her courage, her unwavering poise. Memes began to appear, celebrating not mockery, but the triumph of intellect, preparation, and moral clarity over arrogance and complacency. The courtroom, once an isolated theater of tension, became a global stage, the ripple effect instantaneous and unstoppable. Inside the room, the atmosphere had transformed entirely. Where tension had once skewed in favor of authority, it now gravitated toward reason, preparation, and ethical clarity. The whispers of doubt, the flickers of admiration, the palpable shift in energy were undeniable. Every corner of the courtroom felt it, the balance of power had subtly, irrevocably shifted. Crockett's performance was not merely a rebuttal, it was a declaration of competence, an assertion of dignity, and a demonstration of what can happen when preparation meets courage. Breyer, for all his experience, found himself momentarily disarmed. The smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a studied neutrality that could not hide the undercurrent of tension now threading through his posture. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, but the momentum had already left him. Crockett's calm dismantling of his assumptions had not only countered his point, it had redefined the room's energy, reframing the narrative in a way that left no room for condescension. Every witness, journalist, and observer in the courtroom could feel it. The shift was not abstract, it was tangible, almost physical. The energy that had once favored the weight of title and tenure now favored reason, moral clarity, and the meticulous precision of one who refused to be intimidated. Even those initially skeptical of her age or experience found themselves caught in the gravity of her performance, compelled to acknowledge the quiet force of intellect wielded with purpose and integrity. And as the room absorbed the full impact of her delivery, a subtle smile flickered across the lips of those who had long championed justice, who had watched countless voices falter under authority, and who now witnessed a triumph that was equal parts courage and mastery. The courtroom had been held hostage by expectation, by ritual, by years of precedent, and yet, in that instant, it had been liberated by clarity, preparation, and unshakable dignity. The momentum was undeniable. Crockett had not just countered an argument, she had redefined the narrative, commanding attention with grace, intellect, and unassailable authority. Every pause, every precise inflection, every measured glance had contributed to a performance that would echo far beyond the walls of that courtroom. It was a masterclass in resilience, a demonstration of moral and intellectual power that left spectators, both in person and online, in awe. The room remained suspended for a heartbeat longer, the energy electric, before whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to acknowledgement, and acknowledgement to the realization that the battle had decisively shifted. Breyer's dominance, cultivated over decades, had met its match in preparation, precision, and unwavering integrity. The moment was unforgettable, a crystallization of tension, drama, and triumph that would ripple outward in ways few could yet comprehend. The courtroom erupted online, and the ripple effect reached far beyond the walls. As Jasmine Crockett stepped away from the podium, the courtroom was alive with a quiet reverence, the kind that follows moments of undeniable clarity and authority. Outside, the world had already caught up. Within seconds, clips of her mic drop response circulated across social media platforms, each one capturing the calm precision, the unwavering gaze, the undeniable command of the room. Hashtags began trending almost instantly, hashtag justice delivered, hashtag Crockett stands tall, hashtag courtroom hero, drawing the attention of millions who had been waiting, hoping, and believing that authority could be challenged with dignity and intellect. Memes proliferated, not mocking, but celebrating the triumph of preparation over arrogance, of moral clarity over dismissiveness. Animated gifs of her poised stare juxtaposed with Breyer's fading smirk spread like wildfire, captions praising her strategic brilliance and composure appearing across timelines everywhere. Influencers and commentators dissected every moment, highlighting the subtle artistry in her pauses, the power of her tone, the way she had dismantled decades of assumed authority without raising her voice. The courtroom had become a viral stage, and Crockett's presence had captivated audiences far beyond the immediate legal sphere. News outlets jumped on the story with fervor. Headlines ranged from analytical, Jasmine Crockett redefines courtroom decorum, to emotionally charged, a moment of grace and justice that stunned the nation. Pundits debated not only the legal implications but the cultural significance, framing her actions as a reflection of a new wave of advocacy that demanded both respect and accountability. Panels dissected the event for hours, replaying the footage in slow motion, emphasizing every flicker of expression, every carefully measured pause, and every line that had turned the courtroom into a theater of moral clarity. The ripple effect extended even further. Public opinion began to shift, conversations emerging around respect in professional spaces, the treatment of younger or marginalized voices, and the dynamics of gender in high-pressure arenas. Crockett's performance became a case study in the power of calm resilience, the kind that does not rely on volume or aggression but on intellect, preparation, and moral authority. Schools, law forums, and advocacy groups shared the clips, inspiring discussions on mentorship, preparation, and the courage it takes to speak truth in the face of dismissive authority. For many, the admiration was deeply personal. Immigrant communities, progressive activists, and advocates for social justice saw in Crockett a reflection of their own struggles and aspirations. Here was someone who had faced the weight of institutional power and stood undeterred, someone who had transformed a potentially intimidating scenario into a moment of empowerment. Tweets and posts flooded in, voices expressing awe, gratitude, and inspiration. Stories of people who had felt silenced now felt emboldened, believing that dignity and intellect could indeed prevail. Even within political circles, reactions were mixed but undeniable. Allies praised her courage and foresight, recognizing the importance of preparation, strategic communication, and moral clarity in shaping public discourse. Opponents, while wary, could not ignore the precision and impact of her delivery. Analysts highlighted how this moment might influence future courtroom interactions, debates, and even broader societal expectations of how authority figures engage with rising voices. The dialogue extended far beyond the immediate legal implications, touching on culture, identity, and the evolving standards of respect in positions of power. The courtroom itself had become symbolic. Its walls, once witnesses to formality and procedure, now echoed with the resonance of a challenge met and mastery displayed. The spectators, both physical and virtual, felt a shared sense of witnessing something historic. The combination of poise, intellect, and courage had created a moment that was simultaneously dramatic, instructive, and profoundly inspiring. Viewers were not merely entertained, they were moved, reflecting on their own experiences with authority, expectation, and the power of preparation. In private conversations and public forums alike, the story continued to unfold. Social media threads extended into days, commentary evolved into thoughtful analysis, and Crockett's actions were cited in discussions about leadership, advocacy, and resilience. It was not just a viral moment, it was a catalyst, a spark that ignited widespread reflection on the nature of respect, the power of preparation, and the potential of individuals to influence the course of public discourse through clarity and composure. And yet, amid all the likes, shares, and trending hashtags, a deeper current pulsed beneath the surface. Beyond the surface-level viral acclaim, beyond the digital applause, and beyond the immediate social validation, a profound truth had begun to emerge. The event had become more than a story of courtroom triumph, it had become a symbol, a reflection of what could be achieved when courage, preparation, and integrity converged in the face of arrogance and authority. But beyond the likes and shares, a deeper truth had emerged. As the courtroom settled, the tension that had gripped every witness, journalist, and observer began to ease, replaced by a collective sense of awe. Jasmine Crockett's calm, unwavering presence had transformed what could have been a moment of intimidation into a display of intellect, preparation, and moral clarity. She had not shouted, she had not gestured wildly, yet every action, every pause, every measured word had resonated louder than any outburst could. In that space, dignity triumphed over arrogance, reason over condescension, and integrity over intimidation. Her composure was not merely a performance, it was a reflection of a deeper truth. True power does not rely on volume or spectacle, it is cultivated through preparation, tempered by patience, and expressed with purpose. Crockett's approach offered a lesson for anyone who has ever felt underestimated or dismissed. Resilience combined with intellect creates an influence that commands respect far beyond titles or status. The courtroom, once dominated by assumptions of authority, had been recalibrated by the quiet force of her presence. Observers could not help but reflect on the broader significance of the moment. This was not just about one exchange in a legal proceeding, it was about what it means to confront arrogance with clarity, to respond to dismissal with poise, and to maintain dignity even when challenged. Crockett had exemplified how preparation meets courage, and how the careful cultivation of knowledge and composure can dismantle even the most confident displays of authority. It was a vivid reminder that the path to justice is not always loud or confrontational. Often, it is deliberate, thoughtful, and principled. The ripple effect extended far beyond the courtroom walls. Across social media, in boardrooms, in classrooms, and among activists, her example sparked conversations about how to approach challenges with calm resilience, how to command respect without aggression, and how to maintain integrity in the face of dismissal. People began to share stories of personal triumphs, of moments when they had faced skepticism or belittlement, and of how composure and preparation had turned potential defeat into meaningful influence. Crockett's performance had become a universal model, one that transcended politics, profession, and background. In that moment, the lesson was clear: arrogance may capture attention for a fleeting second, but preparation, knowledge, and moral clarity endure. The courtroom had become a stage not for spectacle, but for exemplifying the principles that underpin justice itself. Every observer, whether present physically or virtually, could take away a sense of empowerment, the recognition that courage expressed with composure can shift narratives, influence opinion, and set new standards for respect and engagement. For those watching, Crockett's example became both aspirational and actionable. It reminded audiences that integrity is not passive, it requires readiness, study, and the courage to confront challenges thoughtfully. It illuminated the value of standing firm without aggression, of responding with intellect rather than impulse, and of letting truth and preparation speak louder than any attempt at intimidation. Her victory was not just in a courtroom, it was a victory of principle, a demonstration that authority must always reckon with clarity, courage, and ethical rigor. And so, as the room gradually emptied, and the echoes of tension gave way to reflection, it became evident why this moment resonated so profoundly. It was not only the confrontation itself that mattered, but what it represented: the triumph of reason over condescension, of preparation over impulsive confidence, and of dignity over intimidation. The moral was unmistakable: courage, intellect, and resilience are forces that can redefine spaces, challenge assumptions, and inspire generations. And this is why this courtroom moment will be remembered for years to come. The courtroom may have returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact of Jasmine Crockett's words lingered far beyond the marble walls. Judge Breyer's smirk had faded, the room had shifted, and the nation had witnessed a moment that would be dissected, remembered, and celebrated for years. Judge Stephen Breyer laughs at Jasmine Crockett, her next line turns the court ice cold, was more than a headline, it was a testament to the power of preparation, courage, and unwavering dignity. What unfolded in that courtroom was a lesson for everyone. It showed that arrogance, no matter how seasoned, can never overpower clarity, intellect, and moral conviction. Crockett's composure reminded us all that true influence comes from preparation, calm confidence, and the courage to speak truth even when faced with dismissal. It was a moment that inspired not only admiration but also reflection: how can we bring the same clarity, courage, and integrity into our own lives? And now, this is where you become part of the story. Share this moment with friends, family, and colleagues. Let it spark conversations about courage, respect, and the power of standing firm in your convictions. Comment below with your thoughts. What part of Crockett's performance resonated with you most? How would you channel this kind of resilience in your own challenges? If you believe in the power of preparation over arrogance, intellect over dismissal, and courage over fear, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Be part of a community that celebrates dignity, celebrates justice, and uplifts voices that challenge authority with integrity. This is more than a video, it's a movement, and your engagement helps amplify it. The courtroom moment has ended, but its lessons echo. Step forward with courage, speak with clarity, and remember that dignity always leaves a mark.